Hey, good morning. There was a lot of rain last night, so I don't suspect there were that many people out too late at the Green Day concert. So I'm expecting a lot of energy from all of you, and the three of us will do our best to reciprocate. So hi, I'm Jay Ackerman. I'm the Chief Renewal Officer and EVP of Customer Success at ServiceSource, and I'm fortunate to be joined today by Mark Cannon, EVP of Client Services from Bazaarvoice, and Gabriel Zuzik from Red Hat. So we'll get a chance to hear from Mark and Gabriel as this session unfolds, but really excited to talk to you about how we see renewals being different from the traditional kind of sales cycle that you see with new product. So before we begin, thought we'd have a little fun. Actually on the social side, so Dreamforce 13, everybody's tweeting about what they like, what they don't like, and where they're at, and I saw the tweets last night about the Green Day concert as I was trying to prep a little bit more for this to make sure that you got some value out of it. But if you feel so inclined, feel free to tweet. I'm tweeting right now a little tweet about the session. I think it's totally awesome. And for those of you that saw Mark Benioff yesterday, I'm sure you'll get why the totally awesome is something that I'm so excited to share. So we thought we'd have a little fun to start out. How do you all see renewal sales being different from product? Do you see it as an art? Do you see it as a science? Or frankly, do you not have a point of view and that's why you're here? So if you take out your phone and text to code 22333 your response, let's just get a quick poll from this group on how you see it. Maybe there were more people out at the Green Day concert late.
Each one of you have great influence over this.
Yeah. All right, we clearly have a winner. We'll let it unfold for another minute, but I guess maybe our job is done. We can head out. Well, we see it as a science, and we're pretty excited to talk to you about why we see it as a science. It is the renewals process requires a different sales motion. It requires deep understanding of data. It requires a view into metrics that I think has been different. And if you do that well and you take a different approach, we think you can drive outsized performance for your business. And we'd like to talk about another industry where an individual and a company took a completely different view on how to use analytics to drive performance in their business. So let's take a look at this.
There are rich teams and there are poor teams. Then there's 50 feet of crap. And then there's us. We got to think differently.
In 1998, many American League teams' payrolls were soaring. As seen in Moneyball, new Oakland A's GM Billy Beane didn't have that luxury. He was forced to get creative.
This better work. I'm just kidding. How are these guys going to survive when they have X amount of money and their competitors have 10 times that amount of money? What these guys decided was we got to look for new knowledge, we got to question everything. They found great inefficiencies in the way they were valuing players.
Beane had to find undervalued players. He looked beyond traditional metrics like batting average and RBIs and instead relied on often overlooked statistics like on-base percentage and slugging percentage, numbers that were actually better indicators of a player's ability to create runs.
Someone was coming along and trying to, out of necessity, innovate in this place. I thought, well, that's a great story, because if you can do it here, you can do it anywhere.
Despite consistently having one of the lower payrolls in the league, the A's would go on to win 4 division titles, and the Moneyball phenomenon was on its way to transforming not only baseball, but the world beyond.
It's a great story about the Oakland A's and Billy Beane. For those of you who know that story, Billy Beane was an innovator, and he, in the face of an industry that used a lot of art in making decisions about players, investing lots of money behind players, he went a different direction and used a set of analytics and a set of metrics to make some choices that went against traditional thinking. And it was pretty amazing. You know, I looked online this morning just to see, you know, where are the A's relative to other teams today, 10 years later, with their payroll, and how is their win-loss record held up in that 10-year time frame? So pretty fascinating. Back in 2002, there was about a gap of 10-1 between them and the top teams in the MLB in payroll. Still today, there's a gap of almost 6 times between the Oakland A's and the Red Sox, my personal team, Red Sox, Yankees, and the Dodgers. But in their win-loss percentage, in that 10-year window, still using their metrics and trying to innovate, they're one of the top 5 teams in that time frame in win-loss. So pretty amazing how they've been able to do that. So let's talk about how we see renewals being like a science. We're going to talk about 3 themes today: looking for overlooked opportunities in the renewals business, using different metrics, and getting your organization aligned. And I think if you do that, using those metrics and those overlooked opportunities, you all that drive renewal sales can have the impact that a Billy Beane has had on the Oakland A's. I think of product sales like the Red Sox and Dodgers, where the capital flows, where the OpEx flows, and where the talent flows. And renewals is kind of taken for granted. So before we hear from Red Hat and Bazaarvoice and what they're doing, let's give you a little bit of background on who we are. ServiceSource has been in business for 14 years. We focus exclusively on helping technology companies maximize recurring revenue. And back in 1999, when we started, we were managing about $10 million a year in annual customer contracts. Now, 14 years later, we manage over $9 billion of renewal agreements and subscription agreements. And for those of you who want to do a little quick math, that is done to scale, which I find fascinating. So we think about it really different. And the new product sales process and cycle, there are, a sales rep may manage 300 plus inquiries trying to drive that single sale and single outcome. And on the renewal side, it's closer to a one-to-one relationship, kind of 1.3 renewals that someone works to drive one. And you might look at that and say, hey, that's pretty easy. But the interesting thing about the renewal is it requires 20 times the amount of data to drive that single renewal. You might think, how can that be? Well, if someone's going to repurchase a contract, you've got to know what assets they have, how many seats they've deployed, what their usage history is, where are they on their upgrade path, how many times have they called in for support, who's the decision maker now, where does the product sit among different facilities. That's a lot of data. And that typical renewal sales rep will manage 40 times the number of transactions in a quarter. So where a product sales rep might drive 5 successful outcomes in a quarter, the renewal sales rep is being asked to drive over 200. For those of you in the renewal cycle, does that kind of ring true, that volume? Well, if you're going to manage that kind of volume with that kind of data, you got to have a different process. So I'd like to now ask our 2 guests to give a little bit of background on their business, and in doing that, also kind of how they see this opportunity in driving a different process and a different outcome in the renewal and subscription space. So why don't we first hear from Mark Cannon at Bazaarvoice.
Great, thank you, Jay. So hope everybody had a good time last night, perhaps albeit a bit wet. I'm Mark Cannon, so I've been with Bazaarvoice for a little over 6 months, and I came in as part of a team to really look at how do we improve some of our core processes. Bazaarvoice was founded 8 years ago on the simple premise that people listen to people they trust, particularly when it comes to making purchase decisions. And so that premise, in conjunction with the internet and the availability of information on the internet, allowed us to launch our first product ratings and reviews for those brands and retailers that are outside the Amazon network. We've expanded from that to provide other offerings to allow consumers to connect with brands, ask and answer, where a consumer can ask a brand a question about a product, Samsung for instance, about a product, you want to put it outside on the back porch, how does it work in sunlight? the brand can respond directly. So this is a mechanism to allow consumers to connect with the sellers of products, retailers like Best Buy or Home Depot or Walmart, or brands like L'Oreal, and provide shoppers or prospective shoppers with much better information to work with and make more informed decisions. And I think about when I was a boy, I'd want to go buy something, and my input were the advertisements on Saturday morning cartoons. I'd go with my meager amount of money to the store, and I was relying on product, packaging, and perhaps a salesperson to make an informed decision. I may run into somebody in the schoolyard, and they may make a recommendation, but it was very hit or miss. I fast forward to when we were expecting our first child. I wanted to buy a video camera. I went out and bought every video camera magazine I could possibly get, looked at all the reviews, and tried to make an informed decision. Today, I sit down, and within 5 minutes, I've got access to all sorts of information, reviews, product specs. If I'm going to buy something, very often, I know as much, or it feels like I know as much as the salesperson. So I feel like I'm making a very, very informed decision. And a large part of what sways my pre-purchase decision making is what I'm hearing from other consumers of the product, good, bad, and ugly. And so that's really what's propelled Bazaarvoice into what we do today. So if I look at my kids, I've got 2 daughters, they can't conceive of a universe before the internet. Everything they do is on the internet. And so all of their purchase decisions, with the exception of potentially fashion, although I would argue that even there they see stars and whatnot wearing clothes, and that's what they want to buy, everything is on the internet. So the growth of people that are influenced by information in terms of their purchase decisions is phenomenal. In fact, Forrester estimates that by 2016, over half, 52% of all sales, online and offline, will be influenced by internet content. And I would actually go farther to say that within the millennial demographic and below, it's well over that already. So it's a phenomenal uptake, and it's really a sea change in terms of how people think about purchasing and the power of online content in those purchase decisions. So very simply put, the vision of Bazaarvoice is to connect and amplify all the voices of the market. So Bazaar, market, voices, voice. That is really our mission and our vision. And our mission is to really change the world one authentic conversation at a time. So you've all seen the headlines about Yelp. And so one of the keywords I want to drill into is authentic. So one of the things that we focused on is really ensuring that the content that we're serving up, which is review content about products, is authentic. We don't have there's not a room full of people in a country writing false reviews. We've got IP sniffers and a lot of technology to prevent that. But it's also moderated, which is the reviews are managed to comply with a retailer or a brand's guidelines. So if they don't want profanity in the reviews, we'll strip that out. We will not strip out negative reviews. In fact, we will not do that because it violates our authenticity policy. So we do a lot to promote authentic review content. In fact, we just launched a trust mark, which we're piloting with 5 or 6 large brands and retailers, which authenticates content as being valid. So that's a powerful mechanism, and it's something that if you see that, you can rely on that. That's trustworthy feedback, good and bad, around a product that you may be looking at purchasing. So what we've been doing over the last 8 years is we've been working with sellers of products, retailers, the Best Buys of the world, buyers, all the consumers, and then makers of product, which would be the brands like a L'Oreal or a Samsung. And over the last 8 years, we're amassing a lot of data on buying habits of people. For instance, we know if a person's bought a large flat panel TV in early January, then they bought a large sofa, and combining those two simple events, they may be a prospect for serving up Super Bowl ads, chips and salsa, or whatever you want to do. So that's some of the power of the data that we're starting to harness. Just to give you a sense of the scale of the business, each month we serve up over 10 billion impressions. These are people going to our servers looking for review content on products that they may be interested in buying. So it's a massive operation from a data perspective. Last point is we're a SaaS business, about $170 million a year in recurring revenue. The renewal event is a very important event for us, as it is with any SaaS company, and we're certainly on that path in terms of evolving the whole renewal and retention process to not just an event, but it truly is a process. That's Bazaarvoice. Back to you, Jay.
Great, thanks, Mark. Well, now let's hear from
Yeah, my fan.
Red Hat, who will give us a little background on Red Hat, and something many of you may know, but also, in addition, share a little bit about your journey in managing a renewal and subscription business.
Sure. Thanks, Jay. Thanks, Mark. So, let's see how this works. There you go. My name is Gabriel Zulik. I've been with Red Hat for about 13 and a half years. It's good to be back here at the Moscone Center. It really reminds me of the early days of the company when we used to do a lot of Linux trade shows here and come to San Francisco all the time. And it brings back memories from back in the day. And it's great to see a company like Salesforce grow to where it is today. We are big Salesforce customers, and Salesforce is a big Red Hat customer as well. So we have a great partnership as it is with ServiceSource. It's great to share the stage with you, Jay and Mark. We've been growing our relationship with ServiceSource for about almost 3 years now, where they're managing a significant portion of our renewals business globally, not just in the US. And it's a relationship that it's only going to get stronger. So very excited about that. I've had different roles in the company, most recently as general manager of region, Latin America, and took over as responsible for renewals a few months ago. So I'm very excited about this opportunity. It's a very, very strategic area for Red Hat as a company, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Red Hat, as many of you know, it's leading company in the open source space. Really, I think we've transformed the company from being just a Linux company 10, 15 years ago to really a vast array of products and offerings around other open source technologies, in particular middleware, cloud, virtualization, and storage. So the company is very, very different than what it used to be 10, 15 years ago. And we're really providing the only complete open source stack for large enterprises deploying open source in mission critical environments. The company's revenue is roughly $1.3 billion right now. In fact, about a year and a half, we reached the $1 billion mark for the first time in our history. It was a big deal for us. We actually did have $1 billion celebrations in all our offices, and we're very proud of the growth we've accomplished in the last few years. We are part of the S&P 500 index for the past 3 years, trading in New York Stock Exchange, which is also a big Red Hat customer, as most of the stock exchanges around the world are. They're using Linux and enterprise middleware in mission critical in most of their trading business and applications all over the world, whether it's Tokyo, Mexico, New York Stock Exchange, stock exchanges in Europe are very, very significant Red Hat customers. Our market cap is about roughly $8.9 billion as of today. We're headquarters in North Carolina, approximately 80 offices worldwide. We have direct subsidiaries, legal entities in roughly 45 to 50 countries today. We have a long history of profitability and strong cash flow growth. Our operating cash flow last year was roughly $470 million. So Red Hat is generating good cash flows every quarter. And it's the beauty of the subscription model. It's more predictable, and if you look at our revenue and our cash flow charts over the years and over the quarters, it's pretty predictable. And we have about 6,000 employees right now worldwide. So what is our business model? We still get asked this question a lot. When we meet with investors, when we meet with customers, partners, even friends and family members, a lot of people still ask, so how do you make money selling open source software? And the reality is, the best answer I give usually is, not just that we sell value, which I truly believe that we do. When what you do is open source and free software, you don't sell IP, you don't sell traditional software, you don't sell licenses. So you have to provide constant value to customers. So that's the beauty of the open source model. If you don't provide value every day of the year, you don't have a business. And so we really sell value to our customers constantly. But more specifically, the way I like to answer that is we really make open source consumable for the large enterprises. Open source technologies are everywhere today. There are hundreds of thousands of projects out there. The Linux kernel is the most popular one, but there are literally hundreds of thousands of projects. And Red Hat gets involved. We not only get involved, but we try to lead in communities, open source projects that are vibrant, that have significant, critical mass, vibrant open source communities out there. And we take those projects and we really build products and offerings around them that are used by large enterprises, Fortune 500 companies, to consume open source. Otherwise, open source, it's bits and bytes, but it's not consumable. So we sell subscriptions around the software that we build with the open source communities, and we sell all the services, consulting and training around those offerings. And as you can see, all these projects lead to enterprise rock-solid products in the different areas that I mentioned. And in this next slide, you can see a little more detail around some of our products. On the left side, all our management products around virtualization, around the operating system and middleware. We have management platforms today, very mature. We have, in the middle, you can see our enterprise offerings around middleware, around the operating system and storage. And on the right side, all the new emerging technologies around cloud computing, where, I'm sure we all agree most of the clouds that are being built today in the world, whether they are public or private or hybrid, all the studies show that between 70 and 80% of all clouds are being built on top of open source. And so Red Hat is in a unique position to capitalize, to monetize this opportunity. And we are very, very excited and trying to lead in this area, just as we have done with Linux and JBoss in the past. So a new set of cloud offerings around, like CloudForms, OpenShift, and OpenStack, where Red Hat is leading in the OpenStack, with the OpenStack Foundation, our partners. And we ultimately believe in a vision of an open hybrid cloud. Not a public, not a private necessarily, but really an open hybrid cloud is really the future where Red Hat is moving. So with that, I'd like to go back to Jay, and we will stick around for more questions about the company if you guys want to.
All right, so we're going to go into a little bit more detail about the art versus science in a moment, and just to do that, like we asked you to lean in at the start and share kind of how you think about it. We'd like you to share right now in kind of two questions. First, I'd love to know kind of how, when you think about your renewal business, how big is it? How big is that opportunity or challenge for you? And so please text in. Then we have a follow-on question. And while you're doing that, we also have 5 gifts for those of you that are here today. And if you, while you're casting your vote, if you reach under your chair and there's an envelope, just raise your hand, and one of the ServiceSource folks will come by and hand out a Google Chrome device. This is the kind of the Apple TV competitor. And so hopefully there's some lucky winners here that'll be able to put that to use. Ah, Richard, you got one. Nice. All right. And then we've got a lady in the back. And there's a few open seats, so feel free to look around you. If not, I'm going to head down there in a second. Okay, so we have a good representation here of some large companies, but also looks like on the smaller kind of emerging side. And then as you think about your journey in maximizing how you run your subscription business or your renewals business. Where are you in that journey? Just kind of starting, kind of limited sophistication, how you think about it and trying to differentiate it from product, or highly sophisticated with kind of specific investments and targeted teams just driving renewals? Okay, good. Well, appreciate you leaning in and sharing kind of where you are in that journey. And for those that are kind of just starting that out, where certainly our goal is to give you some thoughts and ideas to take back. So before we go on, I'd like to talk about how we see the challenge. We see three challenges for companies in running this part of the business. First, there's a data challenge out there. There's a data problem in how companies have to manage data and access data to understand their renewals business. And on average, we see most companies having to access 4 to 5 separate systems before they're able to pull together the necessary information and quote and contact a customer and engage in that renewal sale or that subscription sale. And in fact, we've seen cases up to companies having 15 different systems, maybe companies that have grown through acquisition or haven't been very successful in sunsetting old systems, but 15 separate systems to put a renewal or subscription sales rep in a position to contact that customer and have full visibility and knowledge of their business. There's also a timing problem. A renewal is a perishable asset. I don't know if you think about it as a perishable asset, but we do. And our data shows, and we have data from the $9 billion a year that we help companies retain, and we look at each one of those transactions and we look at them over the 14 years that we've been in business, that for a renewal that doesn't close in advance of expiration, that with each week that passes, the likelihood of that renewing drops by 3 percentage points. So pretty amazing. On a new product sale, you're still working to convince someone to make a decision who hasn't bought, and while there's a close event that you're trying to drive for your business, on the renewal sale, when it doesn't happen on time, the likelihood of that closing goes down considerably. And it's a volume problem. We talked about that earlier, that the volume of deals that one has to work is significantly higher than what you expect a product salesperson to drive. And so, Gabriel talked about his business, and I think on the Red Hat side, they're doing some interesting things to look at metrics and use metrics inside of their company in a different way to surface, to target their teams and to surface the right sales conversations internally. Maybe you can share a little bit of how you're doing that.
On the data side?
Yeah.
So on the data side, we have a couple of things I wanted to mention. Of course, data is, as you said, is massive. It's complex. To generate certain reports for certain countries or customer segments, it sounds easy and straightforward sometimes, but it's incredibly difficult when you have disparate systems that don't communicate with each other. We are actually approaching the data issue from some different angles. We are looking at what we call a tier report, and so looking at customer segments worldwide, not just by geo, but even by country, trying to get more granular in terms of analyzing our data. Where do we have gaps? Where do we have sales coverage gaps? Where do we have cultural issues with our renewals business where we have to educate more, etc.? So a tier report, we're investing a lot together with ServiceSource in developing a tier report by country and by customer segment to understand better where we are and where we need to focus our resources. The other one is really building more predictive tools. And I talk to a lot of companies. Many of you are here in the room. Competitors, partners, customers. Every technology company is really trying to build and to improve these predictive tools or analytical tools to actually get ahead of the game. And so, what I mean by that is you want to understand what you want to anticipate what your customers are going to do in the future. You don't want to get to 9 months or 10 or 11 months from now and start your renewal efforts with your customers. You want to try to get ahead as much as you can so that the renewal becomes a non-event at the end of the year. And so you want to start as early as possible, and we're trying to build these predictive tools that are going to tell us, certain trends within our customer base. For example, just to throw an example, if the data can show us that a customer that has deployed, more than 20 Red Hat Enterprise Linux instances also becomes a middleware customer, for example, these kinds of trends and the data can actually help, build action plans around the world and with your different customers. The other couple of things on the data side, we are tracking very closely not just renewal rates, not just the dollars, but also the retention rates. For Red Hat, it's very, very strategic to retain every single customer. I can attest that many of our large customers today have come from being small, transactional business at the beginning, years ago. So for us, it's very critical to retain customers, not just the dollars. And so we've built compensation plans together with ServiceSource for our Salesforce, renewals Salesforce, to actually go not just after the dollars, but after the opportunities as well. And lastly, on the data side, absolutely critical to track upsell and cross-sell. We have efforts in place together with ServiceSource. There is no better time to actually pitch your new products and your story and get new customers than at the renewal event. And so we have big efforts around cross-selling and upselling and not just the renewal itself. And the data aspect is absolutely critical for all of these efforts. Yeah. We could not do it ourselves. And the data issue will continue to get more complex in a big data world. But I think the partnership with you guys helps in this regard to track some of these different metrics.
Thanks, Gabriel. We're pretty passionate about understanding the data and metrics, and we think that in the renewals business, it's pretty easy to be misled about performance, and in not understanding what that performance is actually telling you, not driving the right set of actions inside of your business. So, an example, here you look at two companies that might report that they have a renewal rate of 80%. And on the surface, sounds like, hey, they're both doing a good job. Both probably have the same outcome. But if you dig back a little deeper, and we have a SaaS-based platform that helps companies get this visibility into their business. In this case, if you look at that, they're actually very different in terms of what's happening inside their business. And here's a little bit of how we think about it. So company A here, if you look at their net renewal rate, we see that being driven by three factors: resolution rate, and do you get a customer to make a decision in the time period that their contract's expiring? Do they make a decision, yes or no? And then if they make a decision, do they make a positive decision, make a yes decision? So a closure rate, I got a yes. They repurchased my product. And then conversion, I had a $100,000 customer, a $10,000 customer. Did I sell them on par? Did they buy the same amount of service going forward, or did they decommission some assets? Or maybe they went from gold to platinum and I upsold them. So if you look at the company A, in this case, they're doing a very good job on resolution rate, but they're not keeping customers whole when they renew. Something's happening and they're renewing that, but when they renew it, they're renewing it for less. If you look at company B, same net renewal rate, but a dramatically different story. They're not resolving opportunity in the quarter, so deals are slipping, to the point I made earlier. And when deals slip, the likelihood of renewing them goes down. And maybe their resolution rate is lower because they don't have a sales force that's equipped or right-sized to get in front of the business and quote it in advance. Maybe they have entitlement policies that are not very good, and customers realize, hey, you know what, I don't need to renew on time, because if I got a problem, I'll call in and they'll still give me support. Does that ring true for a few of you? Maybe? Yeah, I see some heads nodding. But on the conversion rate, this company here, when they do get a yes and they're purchasing, they're selling a heck of a lot of additional product. And by understanding those metrics at a second level of detail, a third level of detail, you can apply the right sales practice and drive a different outcome. Well, let's talk about, we're going to talk a little bit about how we see customers evolve over time, and then we'd love to hear Mark's story and what that looks like inside of Bazaarvoice. This is, driving change in renewals process is a bit like a change management cycle because people have taken it for granted. They kind of assume that those orders will just come in. And if you've gone through budget cycles, you see how hard it is to get investment because people say, hey, they just renew, don't they? So first it's laying the foundation, setting a case for change, and then unwinding some of those bad habits. That I talked about entitlement. That's a bad habit, right? Giving entitlement to people who don't pay for it. You're investing in your IP. Someone should pay to get support. You're rolling out new releases. They should pay to take advantage of that. And then when you do that, you can then start to get strategic and with that data, and as Gabriel was just talking about, map out cross-sell and upsell strategies using next available action with the customer. In our release of our SaaS product, our next release that's coming out this winter, we have a next available, next best action built into that, which helping renewal sales reps know that when I've got a customer in a certain position, where do I take them? How do I get the best outcome? But we see that as a process that unfolds over time, and I think Bazaarvoice is an interesting story to hear how they look at it, and also hearing from Mark, who's got experience pre-Bazaarvoice and also stepped into it kind of a little bit in work in progress and has kind of taken it a little bit of your own direction, right?
Absolutely, that's being kind. We went over the last 6 months. We've gone from a situation where we let renewals happen versus managing them, and one of the first things we wanted to do was just get visibility into which clients were up for renewal in any given quarter, and we had. Gabriel talked about data challenges. We absolutely had data challenges, not across 15 different systems, maybe 2 or 3, but data challenges nonetheless. And it was a very laborious process for people to even understand which companies were up for renewal and then apply the right resource to ensure that we had a positive renewal event. So the first step for us was just see those renewals. And during this process, we are working with ServiceSource, and the nice thing that ServiceSource brings to the table is the process rigor so that we can start to, once we see what clients are up for renewal, we can start contacting them early enough to influence their renewal decision. And that's a large part of the science behind influencing a positive renewal process. One of the things that's a little unique about Bazaarvoice is we typically sell into the marketing function. So we're selling into the CMO, or in a brand, we're selling into a brand manager. And there tends to be a lot of turnover in those functions. And so when we did the original deal 2-3 years ago, there may have been a lot of buy-in, maybe a new game, new set of players there, we need to resell them. That takes calendar time. So the earlier we can see that renewal event coming on board and we can engage with them, the more we can do to resell them if needed. If they're not seeing the ROI out of our solution, we've got a series of strategies and best practices we can deploy. But all of that takes runway, and we need the process rigor to give us that runway to ensure that we've got a successful renewal event. So and this is early days. We're still learning our way in terms of leveraging the science that ServiceSource brings to the table with some of the art that we've got from just years of doing this, albeit poorly, but years of doing this to affect a much greater renewal process.
Thanks, Mark. Why don't give an opportunity for any of you out there, if you have questions for Mark or Gabriel on how they're managing their business more as a science versus an art, some of the challenges they're facing. Anyone who have a question for either one of them or for me, please.
I'll certainly take that. So I think that's a common struggle is where who should be minding the renewal business, and I'll just go out on a limb. I've never seen an environment where trying to manage bookings as well as renewals is a viable proposition. I mean, in my experience, bookings always wins out at the end of the quarter, And we have certainly gone through that, and we've tried every model in the book at Bazaarvoice, and we are looking at our current model has that separated where sales is certainly focused on bookings, and they've got a net bookings care about, so bookings less churn. So there's absolutely a focus on that. But in terms of managing the retention process, that's done by a different group. Did that answer your question? That's what we found, because again, as I said earlier, we weren't managing the retention process, we were just letting it happen. And that's typically what I see where you have people that are distracted. Their primary focus, and if you unwind the comp plans, their primary focus is around bookings. And that's going to trump the retention process, particularly when it comes to the rigor you need to call clients farther in advance than a day before the renewal or the day of the renewal. At that point, it's like an incoming asteroid. They're going to say yes or no, and you can't do anything about it.
Yeah, I'd like to add, I think there is a win-win proposition here that you can, get the buy-in from executives. I think the dirty little secret about renewals, in my mind, is renewals is extremely strategic. It's very data-driven, requires more rigor, discipline, processes, analytics, and it's extremely strategic for any company. But at the end of the day, what every company wants is to grow their net new business, right? And so many companies take the renewals for granted, and they assume that it's going to happen. You need to build an efficient renewals engine, which is something that ServiceSource, focuses on. That's their business, and it's very hard to mix both, right? Like Mark mentioned, it's very hard to have a rep do both, the net new and the renewals. We still have a significant part of our sales force doing both. So, you want to call them combo sales reps. But, the vision is, over time to move away from that and to, be able to build a separate renewals business team, sales team, because it really is a very different animal. And I think, ultimately, we all want growth, and then the growth comes from net new business, growing our footprint in our accounts, growing into net new accounts, etc. But in order to do that, you first need to get your house in order, and you first need to get your renewals engine working well. And so it's really not one or the other, right? But I agree with Mark. It's really very different, two very different businesses, and you have to keep working on that buy-in and showing the data and showing the improvements day after day, and then eventually, I think they all buy in eventually.
Please, in the back, with the blue shirt. Sorry, yeah, right there on the end of the aisle.
So just to add, when I say net new business, the big advantage of building an efficient renewals engine is you can free up your best people, your best resources, your best technical resources, your best sales reps to go after net new. And so that's a big part of, I think, what Red Hat is trying to build. Yeah, go ahead.
So we're in the situation in my company where it is a one or the other type of situation now. We're struggling to decide where to allocate the next available headcount, whether it be on the new business side or the renewal side, because we have a bifurcated team that one handles the renewal business, one handles newer add-on. And we're struggling to determine where we're going to get the ROI from, or where we're going to get the best ROI from. Is it going to be to add a incremental renewal person or a new hunter or an account manager that focuses on new business? And I'm having the challenge of trying to legitimize the factor or prove the need for another headcount or an onboarding team or something to that effect. How do you show the value for the next person that you're going to add as opposed to a newer add-on person?
So I've always found it helpful to convert your annual churn into how many months of selling do you have to do just to break even as a company. And if you're happy with that answer, then then put them on the hunter on the new sales side. If you're not happy with that answer, if you have to sell for 6 months just to break even because you're churning a lot, then I would say probably want to put that person on the retention side.
Gabriel, anything for you to add?
No, I agree. I don't have anything to add. I mean, it makes a lot of sense.
It's kind of a funny situation because, I mean, depending on the maturity of the company, your base that's up for renewal could be this enormous number, whereas the new business could be a smaller number. So a small percentage difference in churn on that large base number has a profound impact on the overall results of the company.
Yeah, I might add, from a ServiceSource perspective and a company that works with 70 plus technology companies, one of the things I see is that by focusing on the improving the maintenance renewal outcome and investing there, then you can fund and fuel the other part of your business. So it doesn't have to be an either or, but that you can show that if I put that extra investment, those extra headcount in driving that renewal sales outcome, here's the return I get, and I can go hire whatever the number is of new product salespeople. And I think there's a pretty compelling ROI that you can demonstrate, and we've certainly seen a lot of the companies that we work with use that business case to drive the way they invest in both sides. So we have a question in the back. Yeah, thank you. I think there was another question, maybe just one row back from you.
So just out of curiosity, as you organize it, you said you were kind of organizing it as two separate businesses, the renewals versus the new. Do you then actually have, when you go to do a forecast, do you actually have them forecast in a separate way, or is there some way you combine them all together for your quarterly forecasts?
So I'm a huge believer in holding people accountable, and I find that when somebody puts their neck on the line around a number, I'm far more confident that they're going to hit that number. So I absolutely look for a person to own the bookings number and a person to own the renewals number. It may roll up to the same person, but I want people that own those numbers for both sides of the business.
Yeah, Red Hat today is not there yet. So the geos, most of the sales management and country manager, they own both numbers, but that's going to evolve, and that's always something we're looking at the business model constantly, trying to evaluate what's the optimal point where you start bifurcating above a certain line.
Maybe just to add in a little to it. So we with our SaaS platform, if you come by our booth, we can show you how actually in our product, we allow someone to manage their bookings number, and manage their renewals number, and we also have a feed into Salesforce where you can link the new product right in with renewals. So if I'm a global head of sales and I have renewals and I have new product, you can bring those two forecasts right in together. A question in the back?
Are there benchmarks available for software and service renewal numbers? What is the target level in the industry? And also, is there a good ratio to follow between new versus renewal for a company to develop?
So your question, benchmarks around what good performance looks like?
Right.
Yeah, so certainly we have from a ServiceSource standpoint, we have a pretty rich database on what we see as good performance, being that slide that I showed earlier of net renewal rates and going a level below that on both resolution, closure, conversion, on hardware and software and SaaS, sold through the channel or sold direct. And you need to look at all those variables when you start to compare those numbers. But if you are interested and want to come by our booth, somebody on our site can talk to you about what you're trying to accomplish and give you some of that data.
The first digit should be a 9, though.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, if it's sub 9, then yeah.
And it really differs greatly by geo, by country, by customer segments. renewal rates in the U.S. look very different than renewal rates
Yeah.
in China for
Yeah.
many companies,
Yeah.
right? And so, and you can go down the line, there are benchmarks, and I think ServiceSource really has that data, because they manage $9 billion in renewals. But it really, you have to approach every country and every customer segment from a different perspective.
We prob-
Our new renewal ratio, is there anything benchmark for that? Or what's the ratio?
When you say new to renewal, meaning which specific?
Overall revenue generation, is there like 25% new versus
Oh, okay. There's certainly lots of data now about how that the ratio is shifting, just as some of the tech companies start to mature. I mean, if you look inside the industry today, on average, 40% of the revenue in technology companies today comes from the renewals. And the piece that's actually more shocking than that, over 50% of the profit inside technology companies is coming off the renewal. We probably have time for one, maybe two questions. I think there was one straight back here.
Yeah, you both have talked about some of the difficulties of handling data in disparate systems, specifically in the context of acquisitions. I was just curious if you could maybe give a little detail of what your guys' systems look like now relative to what it might have been in some previous iterations.
So we're a Salesforce shop, and it was I'll put it, it was an unmanaged Salesforce implementation, which meant all the different functions could add data fields to Salesforce over a period of years. So we ended up with just a mess of an implementation. And we went through a pretty significant process with ServiceSource where we brought in a number of interns to define a data structure and clean up the data. And you've got to take, if you're in that situation, I mean, you really need to agree that you're going to bite the bullet and do a big bang approach to clean the data, as well as put in place a process to ensure it stays clean. And that was a pretty large undertaking for us over the past few months.
I think to be respectful of the time session, we'll stop the questions here, but Mark, Gabriel, and I will stick around, and so if your question didn't get answered, we'll be happy to see if we can handle it after. But we appreciate you taking the time to learn about the art and science. I'd just like to close with saying this is a massive opportunity to drive an impact in your business and an impact in the industry. Gartner estimates that on average $30 billion a year of contracts don't get renewed within the technology space. And if I could leave you with a couple of things that I would suggest you try to take away. One, don't let the numbers lie to you. So we talked about that 80% performance. To Mark, if there isn't a 9 in front of it, you need to be looking. And then when you look at that number, make sure you're asking the second and third question about how that number is derived and what's part of it and what's not. Second, question the status quo. So there is a view that product and renewal sales should be together. I guess that's status quo. I would say question it. We fundamentally believe that your best outcome is driven by separating those two. And then lastly, size the prize. Think about the impact that you could have inside your business if you drove incremental improvement in that side of the business. We see on average companies that focus on this can lift performance by over 15 percentage points. And you can do the math. And that side of the business where the profit is generally north of 80% on each of those maintenance and support agreements and subscription agreements, that can have a significant impact to your EBITDA and net income.
We actually, Jay, just to add to that, that's a great point. We actually built, a few months ago, we built a model that you can play around with the data that shows how much incremental bookings, how much incremental business you can drive with 1% increase in retention rates.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. I won't share those numbers because I can't, but it's pretty stunning, how much additional incremental business you can bring just by adding 1% more retention of your customer base. So it's pretty dramatic.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank Mark and Gabriel in helping us explore this conversation of the difference between art and science and product and renewal sales. And thank you for your time.